Okay, Vera, sorry for the interruption. Now it's all yours.
It's okay. You hear me? I'm very grateful for this opportunity to participate in this brilliant conference. Thank you very much. In this paper, I want to show that translated verse is interesting not only as a pool of experimental metrical and rhythmic forms, which is explained by the natural desire of the translator to copy the prosodic structure of the source text, but also as a form of realization of general trends in the development of verse culture. I will illustrate this idea with examples of the use of the three-ictic dolnik in translations from German and Spanish poetry. My material is translations from Heinrich Heine, from Federico Garcia Lorca, and from Spanish folk romances. First of all, let me say a few words about the structure of the dolnik meter. It's common to say that the dolnik has features of both essential syllabic and essential or tonic verse. The syllabic and essential regularity of structure makes it possible to identify potentially stressed ictic and potentially unstressed non-ictic syllabic positions, and to find an abstract scheme of the line, as we can do with iamb or with anapest. However, unlike essential syllabic binary and ternary meters, the number of syllables in the non-ictic positions of the dolnik line, both before the first ictus anacrusis and between ictuses, interictic intervals, is variable. The anacrusis can be 0, 1, or 2 syllables, and the interictic intervals 1 or 2 syllables. The variable syllabic size of non-ictic positions moved the dolnik closer to essential tonic verse system, in which only actual stresses are in reality, and the stressed intervals vary within a wide range. On the slide, you see examples of the Russian three-ictic dolniks. An early example from Alexander Blok. It's one of the first really popular dolnik texts in Russian tradition, and some lines from a mid-century poem by Anna Akhmatova. It's important that Russian dolnik did not develop from Russian folk verse or from the literary iamb, nor was it directly copied from German or English dolnik, although we find some influences of German dolnik on Russian poetry. It's common to say that that Russian dolnik come from ternary meters, or someone say that it has ternary basis. The rhythmic evolution of Russian dolnik was studied by Mikhail Gasparov. In the table on the screen, you see the percentage of lines of different types in Russian dolniks from the 1890s to 1960s. How the table illustrates the main trends are the following. We see a gradual decrease in the proportion of binary lines. Also, we see disappearance of ternary lines and a preference of dolnik form number 3 over form number 2. Number 3 has in the first interval has 2 syllables and 1 syllable in the second interval, and the second form has 1 syllable in the first interval and 2 syllables in the second one. Poets clearly favor the form number 3. Marina Tarlinskaya has carried out a comparative study of German, English, and Russian dolnik, and the main rhythmic difference which she finds is that Russian dolnik has more disyllabic intervals and does not use binary lines, but actively use poor dolnik lines with which combine monosyllabic and disyllabic intervals. Taken together the information from this table, we can say that English dolnik is typologically closer to iamb than German, and German dolnik is typologically an intermediary form between English with its binary basis and Russian with its ternary basis. At the same time, we have in Russia a tradition of using binary-based dolniks in the translated poetry. There are very few examples in the original poetry, but in translated poetry we find many examples where the rhythmic structure is similar to the German original. Only one such example has been studied in scholarly literature. It's Alexander Bloch's translations from Heine. A comparative rhythmic analysis of Bloch's original dolniks and his translations from Heine showed dramatic differences in the use of binary patterns. In this slide, you can see the line, the binary lines in German and in Russian texts. I analyzed translations from Heine by other translators and found that two traditions coexist in the Russian poetry, in Russian translated poetry. The first one is ecummetric method. In this method use binary and ternary lines and reproduce both the meter, dolnik, and the rhythm of the German originals. And this approach was most fully realized by Bloch. But he had followers. For example, Mikhail Kuzmin or, for example, Lev Pinkovsky. The second method is ecummetric translation with different rhythm. This method use the same meter as the original, but its rhythmic features are not reproduced. This approach was realized in his translations of Heine's poem Germany by Yuri Tynyanov, scholar and translator. The verse of this translation is a dolnik on ternary basis, typical dolnik for the Russian poetic tradition. The fundamental difference between the two approaches is the using of binary lines and different proportion of line types results in different total numbers of monosyllabic and disyllabic intervals. In this slide, you can see in this graphic translators in chronological order. And as you can see, Bloch's translations are most rhythmically close to Heine's verse structure. Other translators, Pinkowski, Kuzmin, Zorgenfrey, Marshak, Silman, Wilhelm Levik, also tried to copy the original sound of the German verse, maintaining a high number of binary lines. For example, Sorgenfrey achieves a high number of monosyllabic intervals, but completely avoids the ternary lines. And Marshak, for example, doesn't like dolnik patterns. If we compare the rhythm of the other translations with the structure of Heine's verse, we can see clearly that since the 70s, the block model of the translations was losing its popularity, and translators in their experiments use an echimetric but rhythmically different strategy, as Tenyanov did. And the leading rhythmic types increasingly chosen are poor dolnik forms, which combine monosyllabic and bisyllabic intervals in the line. It's really funny that Radgaus, for example, does not use binary lines at all, being completely in the sound of Russian dolnik. That how it became established in 20th century. And in the second graph, here, you can see two interconnected trends. The number of binary lines falls down in translators over time, while the number of dolnik patterns, dolnik lines, increases. The dolnik lines are so popular that they are used in the translators of the 17th and 19th 1.5 times more often as in Heine's texts. The reason for this is the final canonization of the dolnik, which in the post-war period established as de facto fifth classical meter, the classical meter number 6 in Russian poetry. The variant of the dolnik with binary lines and monosyllabic intervals proposed by Bloch and Kuzmin and used by translators in the middle of the century did not establish a new important tradition in Russian verse culture and gradually disappeared from the repertoire of translators. But I guess that a large number of very good translators which use these dolnik on binary basis suggest that the reason for its popularity in the Russian poetry is not only language features, but cultural. But it has cultural reasons. And also we know that in Ukrainian poetry, the dolnik on binary basis exists and has has a very important tradition. I will conclude with a brief demonstration of similar trends in the development of the three-ictic dolnik used in translations of Spanish octosyllabic verse. On the screen you see lines of Garcia Lorca with essential markup to someone with an essential syllabic from essential syllabic tradition, like Russians readers and poets these lines sound like a combination of dolnik and trochaic tetrameter. The large percentage of lines that can be seen as trochaic tetrameter is the reason why in the translators of Spanish romances in English, German, and then Russian poetry, the original syllabic structure was replaced by a sensual syllabic verse of the same syllabic length. It means trochaic tetrameter. On the next slide, I give data on the rhythmic structure of the octosyllabic Spanish verse from Gasparov study, and below you can see my data on the Romancero Gitano Garcia Lorca book of romances. As you can see, the rhythm is based on a combination of trochaic, dactylic, and mixed, it means dolnik lines. I analyzed the structure of Russian isosyllabic dolnik. It means dolnik where the translators use only octosyllabic lines in the 20th century from the innovator Valentin Parnakh, who created this form with the idea of replacing the traditional trochaic tetrameter for imitate the sound of Lorca's poetry. And we can see that firstly he tried to use trochaic patterns too, and mixed trochaic, dactylic, and dolnik lines, but he used it only on special stanzas. He couldn't mix them with dolnik lines because it's sound really strange. It's true, and he abandoned this in his later translations, and his followers did the same. But we can see that also ternary lines disappeared in these translations. Dolnik forms became more and more popular with over time, and dactylic lines became less and less common. And also is important that line pattern number 3 that uses two disyllabic interval in the first interval and monosyllabic one syllable in the second interval is very, very popular. And for example, Gilescu, the translator, most famous translator of Garcia Lorca in Russia, use this form during the whole text. I don't know. I do not consider this text in this graphic, but we can find such examples in his translations. So in his translation, dolnik transformed into logaic form. And the history of translations of the Spanish octosyllable verse is an interesting example of how the dolnik chosen the equivalent of syllabic Spanish poetry precisely because of its rhythmic freedom and variety of intervals is completely changed his features and became really fixed and standard form that in fact combines two types of lines, and that's all. So I guess it's we can discuss essential syllabic tendency in Russian literature, in Russian poetry, in Russian word culture, using these examples. And this is all that I want to say.
Thank you very much. And the discussion, questions, Arjos?
Thank you, Vera. So nice to see you. Hi. So my question is about the translations of the Lorca, right? The last examples that you had. So can we say that in this case, kind of the cultural preferences that were already inertia that was already established before was actually more important than the rhythmical structure of the original? In a way, because they lost all the binary potential for the translation of Lorca verse.
I can say that we can find different stages in the development of translated verse. Firstly, it's common to when the translators try to copy the original structure and to find something new for imitate the sound and I don't know the feeling from the source texts. So as Parnach did and for example, for Gillis School the original rhythm is very important. I have some examples for that, but he understands that it's more beautiful sound that of poor dolnik, I guess. But in the later I can see that translators use these patterns like something ready for them, and they don't feeling the problem. Now we have an established tradition of this type of translations, and in this presentation I show you only isosyllabic translations, but we have more and more translations from Spanish with normal, I mean Russian dolnik on ternary basis. And for example, Parnach or Gillis School never used the lines with never, sometimes, but I can say never use the lines with two-syllable anacrusis, for example, which is not common for Lorca. But the translations, the other translators do it. So there are different stages in this process. And with German translations, we have the same situation, but it's more difficult because this type of dolnik that Bloch and Kuzmin used doesn't exist now in Russian poetry, or maybe I don't know. Maybe some modern poet use it, but we have no papers on it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vera. Glad to see and hear you. So I have two remarks. One is short and not so important, and second is long and maybe even less important. First, these your schemes can be misleading because if the poem is written in one, if the poem is not heterometrical, it cannot be the binary, ternary, and dolnik. So because these lines are homonymic to iamb, to triple meters, or but all the poem is 1 meter. There are no contrast between these.
Yes,
So,
sure.
This is technical remarks.
Yes, I just copy the manner of Tarlinskaya, Gasparov, and Bailey discussing this this point. But it's true. We should be more terminologically correct.
Yes, Vera, the common mistake is even more dangerous than individual. Second point, about dolnik in general. Dolnik, the word dolnik, is idiosyncratic to Russian. And when we apply this term to other verse system, we must be very careful. Gasparov's definition, according to Gasparov's definition, dolnik is a meter where the interval between strong positions, 1 or 2 syllables. And that's it. But it's not enough, because such structure can be achieved in 2 different ways. It can be additional syllable in binary method or omitting the syllable in ternary method. And this is not only academic difference, we can hear it. And in the Russian tradition, we have only dolnik which is developed from ternary methods, with one exception, hexameter.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, which is a very interesting point. But when we are speaking about German dolnik, we must be careful, because in German poetry, there are both possibilities, and they are very different in the end. I have always quite tense argument with David Chisholm, author of the book Goethe's Knittelvers. For him, everything is Knittelvers. But I am sure that this is a mistake. That for Tarlinskaya, everything is dolnik. But we must make a difference between Knittelvers, which is derived from binary meters, or syllabic meters, in the case of Hans Sachs, and dolnik, which is from triplets. We can hear it in Goethe. Haben nun auch Philosophie, Juristerei und Medizin und leider auch Theologie. And so on. It's so like iambic. Meter with some deviation. But wer reitet so spät durch Nacht und Wind, das ist ein Vater mit seinem Kind. Completely different. We can, and even, I don't know, in China.
Yes,
In Western Auga kind of trailer. It's, and the rhythmical structure is as I am. But it's not I am, because in the deep structure it's triple measure. What is the difference? In binary meters are more sophisticated. They have great tension between the meter and rhythm. The rhythm is much more frequent. In ternary methods, each strong position must be accentuated. And this, I don't know, this ethos of ternary method comes also to dolnik. And when we, for example, in Faust, there are different kind of meter. There's polymetric, and we can see the difference between Knittelberg's and dolnik, although both of them are have four strong positions.
Thank you very much, Mikhail Yurievich. Yes, I'm totally agree with you, and also I know that German dolnik, as Starlinska calls English German dolnik. It's not. We can find different types of verse, Knittelverse, and also Uhland, for example, or Goethe use another type of meter with where many lines have ternary rhythm, and that's why I guess Zhukovsky choose ternary meters for in his translations of German poetry, and it's a mistake that how Gasparov explains that he take a ternary meter because it has a really strange sound for Russian tradition or something like that. It's a mistake. Yes, and but it's interesting that it's not true that in Russian poetry this dolnik on binary basis does not exist. I show you that in translations it exists, and it's interesting. And when you read this text, you can see that it's really good poetry. So I guess it's not language but culture that is very important here. But we should develop this question in our future. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vera, for your talk. Thanks to all our speakers. Thank you very much for your discussion. And I guess, Mari, it's time for any announcement you want to make? No. So coffee break. Thank you very much.